Hey everybody! My name's Bailee Hull, and for this research project, I decided to do a project on the history of masks. Now, even before I became like a theater person, I love masks. I love looking at them, seeing all the different types, and I liked wearing them for fun sometimes. So I saw this assignment as an opportunity to really get to learn more about how masks came to be, how important they are in theater, and I even took the opportunity to replicate a few masks from history. Starting with this one. This is not so much theater, as much as it is with the origins of theater, which is ritual. In our textbook it says, the most widely known theory as to theater's origins is that it emerged out of myth and ritual. So a lot of the things that were present in ritual, of course, are also present in theater, like masks, costumes, and different things like that. But it also quoted in our textbook that though ritual and theater may use many of the same elements, the distinction between them ultimately depends on their functions. This was definitely true. Because with theater, it's more about entertainment and pleasure. Of course, both tell stories, but with ritual, it was a little different, a little more serious, I guess, with society. For example, in many countries like Egypt, burial customs were extremely important. And anthropomorphic masks, or masks depicting human characteristics, were often used in ceremonies and rituals involving dead or departing spirits. Masks like this often represented the characteristics of a specific dead person in order to honor them and to establish a sort of passageway, I guess, between that world and the spirit world. Now, from the Middle Kingdom, so about 2040 to 1786 BC, to the 1st century AD, ancient Egyptians used stylized funerary masks to cover the faces of their deceased. The mask was made to sort of look like the person that had died, so the mask served as a guide for the spirit back to its final resting place in the body. Usually these masks were made of cloth and then covered with stucco or plaster and then painted, and for really important people like the pharaohs, they actually used silver and gold. Now, this one's interesting because this isn't any of those things. This is a replication of a mask from about the end of the 18th dynasty, 1300 BC, that is on display in the Louvre Museum in Paris, France. This one is not made of stucco or plaster, or certainly not silver or gold. This one's actually made out of wood. I used clay to make the decorative eyepieces and the eyebrows, and then I just mixed different paints together to give it a browning look, but also a slightly yellow tint, because another thing they used to distinguish between men and women is if it was a man that was dead, they would usually paint it red, but if it was a woman, they'd usually paint it yellow, and this one was a very faded yellow, so it can be safe to assume that a woman was the deceased in this case. Alright, skip ahead a little bit to 5th century Greece, the founder of our beloved theater, and moving on to mask number 2, which is this mask. In 5th century theater, comedy, tragedy, and satire, there were several noteworthy conventions. A big one being that, with the exception of the flute players, every single actor in every play wore a mask. Now, in a lot of cases, especially during the 5th century, the Greeks placed considerable emphasis on the voice. Facial expression wasn't a huge deal to them because you could make an entire facial expression on a mask. But with such huge spaces like the Colosseum, they needed something to project. They actually needed something to project their voices over such a huge space. So they designed masks to fit around the mouth, working around the mouth to work as a sort of projection device to get their voices over such a big space. And that's what was done right here. This is a replication of a mask that I found on a website called theatermasks.com. which is home of the work of an amazing mask crafter named Jonathan Becker. He bases his designs off of ancient designs that people have seen throughout history, and this was one of them. This was a Greek comic mask. Now, after the 5th century, it's safe to assume that up until then, facial features were very expressive but also very realistic. After the 5th century, that changed. That completely changed. On both tragic and comedic, facial features were enlarged, exaggerated, caricatured. It was with pretty much all masks in tragic, but there were only certain masks in comic theater that they did that with, and one of them was slaves. And for slaves, hair color was also conventionalized. Slaves typically had red hair. So when I saw this online and it was labeled as Comic 1, I thought, red hair, it must be a slave comic mask. So I had a lot of fun doing this one. Same thing again, like with the Egyptian mask. I used clay to make really big caricatured features, the giant nose, the wrinkly eyes, and then, of course, the ridiculous curly hair. I had fun mixing the colors together, though. I think it turned out okay. Now, I'm going to skip ahead a good bit more, one more time, to my personal favorite, my third mask. We're going to 15th century Italy, which was around the time that of the development of the Commedia dell'arte, the comedy of professional players. This was an extremely popular form of theater and entertainment in Europe from the time that started around 15th century all the way into the 18th century. The two big characteristics of Commedia dell'arte are improvisation and stock characters. Now, going on stock characters, there were two character types, the masked and the unmasked. The unmasked were the young lovers, the people that they didn't want to look ridiculous, so they often had impressive, creative facial makeup, but they didn't use masks for the young lovers. However, the masked roles were divided into masters and servants. Now, this one is not a master. This one is one of the servants, or I guess they're called the Zani then. There were several Zani with several variations. This one is a replication of one of the most popular Zani out of all of them, which was, in Italian his name was Arlecchino, but we know him a little better as Harlequin. Now, there are several variations, and this was also a replication of one of the designs of the amazing Jonathan Becker. I had to change it a little bit because he had chosen to make his a strange kind of orange color. However, in every place that I read, even in our textbook, it states that Harlequin's mask is black. So, I took Becker's replication design and just changed the color. And I wanted to bring out certain features, so I added a lighter gray. And of course, more clay, even more caricaturized than the first one. Harlequin was supposed to be a mixture of cunning and stupidity. So my personal theory, the cunning may be represented by the black color. It's almost cat-like, I've also read somewhere. And I think the ridiculous caricature of this shows the stupidity part. Now, like I said, the costume underwent many changes over the years, but the one thing that, as far as I've read, that always stayed the same was the fact that the color of his mask was black. And there were also other common features, usually a big nose and a bump on the forehead. That could be a couple of different things, but I used this lighting to bring out what's supposed to be kind of the cunning and silliness in his eyes. To highlight his giant, ridiculous eyebrows and his giant cheeks and the giant curve of his nose. And even just the ridiculous kind of wrinkles that are up here. Oh my goodness, this thing took forever to make, but it was so much fun. And I think that's it.